So yeah, I had all kinds of different introductions. You want to hear the worst one?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
My following guest and I met in the bathroom in the basement of a Manhattan jazz club.
Yeah, I would keep it at that. We didn't actually meet. I think we didn't actually meet till, but we saw each other in the
That's
bathroom.
right.
So just to be completely transparent about the whole thing.
Yeah, and it was a classy one with the people that you give a tip to for giving you soap. So
Right. Exactly. You're
that
right.
was quite
You,
prestigious.
you can
Um,
introduce this any way you want. I have
okay.
no fear.
All right. Well, you are listening to NYC Radio Live. David Ellenbogen here. I am thrilled to get a chance to speak with the man. People have called you the father of modern bluegrass. You can deny that or accept it if you'd like, but it's Tony Trischka. So I'm super excited. A guy who really stretched the boundaries of the banjo like no other. So thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, David. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are fathers and perhaps some mothers as well.
Oh yeah.
Not singular, but yes.
Yeah, quite a history of the banjo, actually, right? Many amazing figures. I actually watched that PBS special that you were behind,
Hmm.
and that was extremely revealing. But yeah, let's start with you. So the bio kid from Syracuse,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Syracuse, New York. My father was a physics professor. My mother did jewelry and studied French and was a homemaker. And I grew up, there was music around the house. My father played piano, and I would go to sleep listening to him playing Fats Waller and Duke Ellington on the piano, as well as Claire de Lune by Debussy. Uh,
Wow.
so there's that. And then we had, records. My parents were very left wing. And so my parents would be listening to Pete Seeger and the Almanac Singers and Woody Guthrie and the Weavers, folks that were blacklisted, not Woody, but some of these folks were blacklisted
It
during the
was,
McCartney
yeah.
era. Anyway, and I found out years later, well, never mind. I was going to get into some other stuff, but I won't. Anyway, so I was growing up hearing folk music, and my mother went to school at the Little Red Schoolhouse in Greenwich Village in the 40s with Toshi Seeger, Pete Seeger's wife.
Mhm.
My mother went to school with her, so there was this family connection to the Seeger family. So, but hearing Pete's banjo growing up, it didn't click. But then I took flute lessons, piano lessons, guitar lessons. Started getting to folk music in the early '60s during the folk boom, the latter part of the folk boom, and got into the Kingston Trio, and they had a song called MTA on their At Large album, Kingston Trio at Large. And there was a banjo solo in there by a guy named Dave Guard. And I heard that. And it was like, okay, now I got to play the banjo. And that was it.
Yeah. So your dad, so super lefty family. Your dad, interesting that he was a physics professor at Syracuse University.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess that generation, some of those other physicists like Feynman or whoever, those guys, Einstein, they were music was part of part of it being a
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Einstein, I think, played violin, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah. And um interesting that he could pull off playing the Fats Waller and stuff like that. So he was a real he could play.
Yeah. I've somewhere around, I've got a cassette of him playing some of that music. So, and I didn't get it at the time. It was only years later when I started checking out Duke Ellington. Oh, my dad was really cool. I didn't appreciate it. I mean, it was just my dad playing music, and I knew it was Fats Waller and Duke Ellington, but I didn't get it.
And so I guess your parents around the kind of those waves of folk music where it's music, but it's also charged with social justice and meaning and stuff like that. Did it?
Yeah.
So did that did those records of Woody Guthrie, was that the meaning it had for you as a kid too, that this was, standing up for the little guy, or was it was just tunes?
It was just tunes. However, I did have a social consciousness very early on.
Mm-hmm.
I think because of my parents, because they were very socially conscious, and aware of all these things. And I guess I'll just say it. My parents were investigated by the FBI. I found out many years later from a family friend, that was playing out in California, and she called up to say, I can't see you, but because I'm busy, but I just want to say hello. And she said that these two gentlemen, I was hanging out on my front porch, and these two gentlemen in suits and ties came to the foot of the stairs and said, can I talk to you about the Trischkas? And another family 2 houses away from us, told me that the son of the parents told me the same thing. And my sister reminded me that they actually came to our front door. This would have been in the maybe mid to later 50s. So my dad was at Los Alamos, actually. He was should I be getting into all this? I don't know if I should get into all this.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah.
He was being a physics professor. He went to Los Alamos right after they dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And as soon as he didn't work on the bomb, but he was going down there to do further research or whatever. And as soon as that happened, as soon as Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened, he realized we got to put the genie back in the bottle, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to various senators saying, "Hey, this is a terrible thing. We can't have this. We have to do something about this." In fact, there's a spread in Life magazine in 1945 that my father's in a few pictures, talking to these various senators and saying, this is not good, to say the least. And that's probably why the FBI was looking into him, because they knew he was at Los Alamos, I'm sure.
Wow, my folks were a union family, very strong union family too, and the investigators came by my grandfather's jewelry shop.
Who came by? I'm sorry, who came by?
Some kind of investigators, similar thing. I guess some of the local, regulars at the shop might have been reading the Daily Worker or whatever. They had reason to be suspicious about them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very common, and I guess the circles they were in. So you got exposed to Pete Seeger actually playing live as a young kid, because he was in the circle through Toshi, or not so much?
No, I never saw him live. I was friendly with him in his later years, but no, not at that point. But this was also the time that Bob Dylan was coming mm-hmm. into his own as a protest singer and composer, and Phil Oakes and Tom Paxton and that whole crew. So I think more through Dylan. So I remember writing protest songs when I was 12 years old and 13 mm-hmm. years old, and I still have them written down somewhere here. I think more through Dylan and through that thing, as opposed to through my parents.
Uh-huh.
But we used to sing Union Maid as a family. The once was Union Maid. I already forgotten the lyrics, but anyway, it was a Union song that the Almanac singers did. So mm-hmm. I definitely had Union consciousness at the age of 10 or something. Anyway, mm-hmm. So, and then of course, once I heard this banjo stuff, and I went, I asked, where can I hear more of this? Oh, well, check out Earl Scruggs. And at that point, the social consciousness sort of took a back seat. It was there, but it was, suddenly I'm playing bluegrass music, and that became my passion.
Yeah, and when we met, you mentioned that you had gone to the 1963 Newport Jazz Folk Festival.
Correct.
Yeah, what was that environment?
It was really amazing, and some of it I got, some of it I didn't get. But I got to see Mississippi John Hurt, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, Pete Seeger, of course, Bob Dylan. It was really the year that Bob Dylan came into his own. He was on stage on the Saturday night concert doing Blowing in the Wind with the Freedom Singers and Joan Baez and Pete Seeger. And he was front and center because he wrote the song. And my banjo teacher, my first banjo teacher, knew Dylan from the Village. So I got to meet him and get his autograph at Newport. And I'll tell you the other Dylan story. In October of '63, Dylan came to Syracuse, the local theater, and this is again at the height of it was Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, and times they were changing and all that. And when I started taking lessons from this guy named John Gaines in Syracuse, they go to his apartment, and up against the wall is a record by a guy named Bob Dylan, or so I thought. And it was Dylan's first album, and it was autographed to John from Bob because my teacher knew him from the Village. And I've told this story many times, but so Dylan comes to Syracuse to do a benefit for CORE, Congress on Racial Equality, a civil rights organization. And afterwards, I went with my teacher. I got to go backstage and shake Dylan's hand. And I remember he had these really long fingernails so we could pick. And afterwards, we were invited over to his hotel room across the street. And there was a heavyset guy there, probably Albert Grossman, his manager. And Dylan came over to me and said, "Would you like?" I'm 14 years old at the time. Said, "Would you like something to drink?" And I said, "I'll have a Coke." And Dylan went down the hall and bought me a Coke. So probably, I always say it's probably all been downhill since then, but pretty good at the age of 14 to have something like that happen.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah,
that is amazing.
Yeah.
And at that time, I mean, his charisma, I mean, he must have been just kind of, did he have a palpable glow to him that,
yeah, probably not an actual glow, but yeah, I can still picture him on stage from that night. It was just incredible. And I'm a big Dylan fan. We go to concerts with his, once a year, once every 2 years. And once in a while, I see a glimmer of what it was like in '63, where the entire show is just like, oh my God, I love his singing. Not everyone does, but his phrasing, his guitar playing, the whole thing was just amazing. And then later on, I would see a glimmer of that in more years, but he really had this thing back then.
Yeah, because he was like, it seemed like he was like channeling something, because he was, he'd just be reciting Visions of Johanna or something like that with all these complex lyrics, and it's just streaming out of the guy.
Yeah. In the mid '60s, it was just crazy. I mean, many great songs after that too. But yeah, at that time, and he said in interviews, I can't ever do that again. I do different things, but I can't do that. That was like, a crazy, Blonde on Blonde, Bring It All Back, all those albums.
So the '63, and you get to see your the Kingston Trio were at the Newport Folk as well, right?
They were not there. They were in Newport like '58 or '59.
Oh wow, okay.
The Jazz Festival, actually. But Bill Monroe was there. I think Skip James was there, maybe Son House. It was a time when all these people were being rediscovered who had recorded in the 20s and 30s, and folklorists were going down into Mississippi, down into the Delta or wherever, or Doc Boggs. It was another one of my big culture heroes who recorded in 1928, banjo player. And I remember seeing him, but I didn't realize who he was. And now I love his music, but at the time. But these are all people. Mike Seeger had discovered Doc Boggs. And Mike told me the story that in 1963, earlier in '63, Doc American Anthology of Folk Music had come out in the 50s, and so there were some Doc Boggs cuts on there, as there were Mississippi John Hurt cuts. And so in '63, Mike Seeger's musing to his wife, "Gee, I wonder whatever happened to Doc Boggs." And his wife said, "Well, where did he last be known to live?" So, somewhere in Virginia, whatever Mike said. "Well, did you call information?" No. So he calls up information, whatever this time. Is there a Doc Boggs there? D-O-C-K Boggs? Yeah, here it is. And it calls the number. And, "Hi, is this Doc Boggs?" Yes. And that's how he was rediscovered, calling information. And then he ended up going to the 1963 Newport Folk Festival and recorded another 50 songs for Folkways, and was at other festivals, and I think died in '66. So, but anyway, a lot of these people were being rediscovered and brought back into consciousness.
Of course, you remember the story of how they discovered Mississippi John Hurt, right? He had a song. He had a song called. He had a song which had a line, "Avalon, that's my hometown. That's where I'm from." And they drove to. There was nothing on the map that said there was no Avalon, Mississippi anymore. But they drove to the general area, and lo and behold, people were like, "Oh yeah, just right down the street," and they brought him back, and that's what brought Mississippi John Hurt back to the world. So did it mean anything to you when Dylan went electric and it kind of went in a different direction?
Yeah, I could kick myself because he'd gone electric. I mean, there were a couple of electric tunes on his second album.
Yeah,
even. It was more subtle. But he played in Syracuse in '65 with the Hawks, I guess. And I didn't go to see him because he went electric. And then a month later went, "Oh shoot, what did I do?" I was a purist. Oh my God, because I'm forgetting his name. Erwin Silver, maybe in Sing Out magazine, was complaining about Dylan going electric. And in fact, my parents were getting Sing Out in the '50s, like the first issues. So I continued that, and then Dylan selling out, he's going electric, and again a month later was like, "You idiot! Why didn't you go?" So yeah, it was a short-lived protest.
That's the I was so much younger than I'm older than, or I'm so much older than I'm younger than that now situation, exactly. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so you got the bluegrass bug, and you discovered Earl Scruggs. And for non-banjo players like myself, like, what's the before and after with Earl Scruggs? Like, how much did he just change the game?
It was a big change. He was playing with a guy named Lost John Miller in 44 into 45, 1945, and but he auditioned for Bill Monroe. I think it was in October of '45, and when he went into audition for Bill Monroe, he had a terrible case of the flu, and Lost John Miller. He was living in Knoxville in a trailer with Lost John Miller, and Lost John. They were coming back from a tour, and Lost John Miller was giving up music, but they were going to stop by Nashville so Earl could audition for Bill Monroe, and then Lost John was the two of them were going to drive back to Knoxville, and Monroe was like an hour and a half late for the audition in Nashville, and Lost John Miller said, "Look, I've got to go. You'll have to take the bus back to Knoxville." So Earl said, "Okay." Another hour and a half, 3 hours late, Bill Monroe finally shows up, and Earl looks at him and says to himself, "What a beautiful head of hair." And this is all true. These are in Earl's writings. And anyway, Earl plays "Dear Old Dixie" and "Sally Gooden" as his audition numbers. And he said Monroe didn't really say anything, but did like a little dance while he was playing. So he knew that he had probably won the audition. And then because Earl had the flu, Earl just wanted to leave and take the bus back to Knoxville. And Monroe said, "Now you sound good, boy, but I want you to play with the Bluegrass Boys and see how you sound with the band." So he had to hang out for another 3 or 4 hours and play with the band. And then it's like almost 11 o'clock at night, and Earl says, I've got to go. I got to catch this last bus to Knoxville. So Monroe says, okay, well, Saturday morning, you be there at such and such a location. Get on the bus, and we'll go and play. And then you will have joined us. So Earl gets to the bus station, gets on the bus. There's no seating. Every seat is taken. So from 11 o'clock at night till 7 in the morning, he stands there with a terrible case of the flu, and maybe sits down in the well between the seats. So that was his audition for Bill Monroe. Now, I haven't answered your question yet. What did he have? What he had was just, his timing was amazing. And I was friendly with Earl in his later years, and he said to me one time, what he thought he brought to the banjo was syncopation, which is when you accent notes you don't expect to be accented. You always expect the downbeat to be accented, but he would accent the offbeat or the beats between the downbeat and the offbeat. And no one was doing it in the way that he was doing it. And his attack on the strings was just like so powerful. And again, his timing was ridiculous. It was so amazing. The distance between the notes was perfect. And there are acetates of him playing live on the Grand Ole Opry. And the Opry announcer would say, now here's Earl Scruggs with that fancy banjo picking. Now, Earl, you get Brother Bill and let's go. It's Bill Monroe's show. It's Bill Monroe's band. And the announcer is talking about Earl Scruggs more than he's talking about Bill in the introduction. And you can hear the audience going crazy after his breaks, after his solos. And sometimes Monroe would let him take every solo in a tune. It would be, here's a banjo solo, then a fiddle solo, then a mandolin solo. It's all banjo. Not every tune, but various tunes he would let Earl do that. So he knew he had a good thing. And people were just excited to hear this. They'd heard banjo before, but not like this.
And according to, and I don't know if it was your own bias seeping into that PBS documentary, but they were kind of making the argument that what we think of as bluegrass is as much the contributions of Lester Flatts and Earl Scruggs as it was, Bill Monroe. I mean, not that you have to quantify these things so much, but is it that towering an influence of like what bluegrass is when we think, oh, well, this is bluegrass, the platonic thing. Is right. It's Earl Scruggs is in there in our head?
Yeah. I mean, once Lester Flatt was already in the band when Earl joined, but I wouldn't say if there was no Lester Flatt, there would still be bluegrass with Earl Scruggs. If there was no Earl Scruggs, then it's an arguable fact. But bluegrass, as we know it today, in its essence, was Flatt and Scruggs with Bill Monroe, starting in 1945. But without Earl Scruggs, it's hard to say, because there was a guy named Don Reno who went to join Bill Monroe in 43, who was playing three-finger style, not with the sophistication that Earl had, but he went to join Bill Monroe in 43 and said to Monroe, look, I want to join the army and fight for my country because it's World War II. And Reno said, if I'm 1A in the draft, then I'm going to go fight for my country. Otherwise, I'll join you. And he did end up joining the army and ended up in Burma. And Don Reno told me that, like in the late 30s, he'd be doing a radio show in North Carolina, and the shy kid would it was like a weekly show, and the shy kid would sort of be hanging back listening, a teenager. And finally, after 3 or 4 shows, came over to Don Reno and said, hi, my name's Earl Scruggs. I play some banjo. So Don Reno was on some level an influence on Earl. But anyway, Don Reno comes back from World War II, like in 46 or whatever, playing banjo the way he'd always played it. And someone said, oh, you sound like Earl Scruggs, even though he was out there doing it professionally before Earl. Anyway, I could geek out forever on banjo history. So.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know. It takes away the great man theory, which is always imperfect, I suppose. So,
but Earl was the great man, though. He was great. Without him, yeah.
Okay, and then so I guess when you start, you're probably playing somewhat conventionally, but somewhere along, I mean, if we get into the 70s, that's when you connect with Andy Statman, and you guys are kind of well, you're starting to rewrite the rules a little bit about what's possible within this genre. So how did that evolve in terms of your own openness? Was it always there? Were you always kind of experimenting, or you had to break free?
Well, no, I was always warped, I guess. The first day I got my long neck banjo, because I wanted the long neck banjo to be like the Kingston Trio and Pete Seeger. But the very first thing I ever played on it was the melody of Ode to Joy, Beethoven's Ode to Joy, because I loved that piece of music and I could just find it on the strings. And then in 1965, me and some friends of mine went down to the very first bluegrass, 3-day bluegrass festival ever, and Bill Monroe's there, and Don Reno and Red Smiley and the Stanley Brothers and Jimmy Martin and on and on. And there was a banjo contest being judged by Ralph Stanley and a couple of other traditional players. And I played a tune called 9-Pound Hammer, a traditional tune. Mm-hmm. And I put in some fake Middle Eastern modes. This is after I've been playing for like 2 years or something. And someone took a picture of Ralph Stanley listening to me. And he has his head in his hand like, what? I lost. I did not win the contest. This young guy playing Foggy Mountain Breakdown really well won. But anyway, being a child of the 60s and being into the Beatles and Van Dyke Parks and the Beach Boys' Smile and Zappa and Hendrix, everybody, all that musical ferment, like every new Beatles song, every new Beatles album, they were pushing the boundaries further and further. And so I was definitely into that frame of mind, and also getting into the 70s and early 70s, getting into fusion music with Chick Corea and Weather Report and John McLaughlin and listening to Charlie Parker and Coltrane, et cetera, et cetera. So I was listening to a lot of stuff that wasn't bluegrass. So I started writing tunes that were a little different, I guess you could say. And it wasn't trying to be weird. It was just what was coming out naturally from what my environment was. And then I was with a group called Country Cooking in the early 70s. A guy named Pete Warnick, who was the founder of Hot Rise, he started this group, Country Cooking, and I came down from Syracuse to Ithaca, New York, to join the band. And one of the very first Rounder records ever was our 15 bluegrass instrumentals. And then we did a second record for them, and Kenny Kosek and Andy Statman came up from New York City to be on it. And on their bus ride back down to New York, they said, hey, let's get a band together with Tony. So they invited me to move to New York City and start this band that ultimately became called Breakfast Special. And that's how I got hanging out with these like minds, people that were, we're all based on bluegrass, but doing all sorts of crazy stuff too. A guy named Stacy Phillips was on dobro, another guy pushing the boundaries of what you could do. He would do like 360-degree turns of the bar while he played the dobro, or do geometric like shapes on the neck, and then play those shapes. He would like do a parallelogram or a triangle, isosceles triangle, while he was playing the dobro, and put the bar down like that to make interesting sounds. Yeah, I know you're kind of going, what?
No. I'm not at all. Actually, I'm like, yeah, I'm going through my head, like, because it's actually making me think, Coltrane, maybe you've seen those amazing triangles. He made these shapes out of taking a circle of fifths, and then he made these, like, you'd call them like sacred geometrical shapes, and then see what that sounds like, if you make a diamond or a triangle or a square,
Yep,
and so there's all that stuff. I mean, going back to Pythagoras, like it should turn into something.
Yeah, I know. Any way you can derive sounds and get new sounds, it's a great way to go about it. So yeah. Anyway, so I'm hanging out with these kinds of people, and we're, we go on stage at these bluegrass festivals and do, we do a bluegrass tune, then we do a Jewish tune, then we do a Hawaiian tune. Princess Papuli's Got Plenty Papaya, a Sam Cooke, a cappella Sam Cooke tune, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember playing at some festival in Pennsylvania right after the gospel sing on the Sunday morning. We were the first band out there, and everyone's in their lawn chairs on the beautiful sunny Sunday late morning. And Andy Statman has a cassette machine of klezmer music from like the 30s, and puts it into the microphone, which was still on, and here's this crazy clarinet wailing klezmer music, and it's blasting out into the audience. You can see these people in lawn chairs with giant question marks coming out of their heads. It's just a different kind of gospel music, you know. So
more Saturday than Sunday, but yeah.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
I was gonna say, you know, when I was thinking of questions, like I was thinking how, you know, Bill Monroe famously said, you know, it's not what I put into bluegrass to create bluegrass, it's what I kept out of it. And I was thinking, yeah, it is very rare. You know, I never heard him do any Hasidic melodies, but
No,
you guys covered that.
but he recorded with electric guitar like in the 53, 54, and he has a recording from, I don't know, would have been in the 80s, called My Last Days on Earth, with this wonderful mandolin tune with the strings, instead of being equally tuned pairs, he would tune down one note of the pair. So it's crazy tuning. And I remember we were driving out in the Midwest somewhere, heading to a gig with the band I was in at that point, and we hear this thing on the radio. It sounds like Bill Monroe, but there's a string section and a choir and bird sounds, and it was Bill Monroe, but this producer added all that stuff on it. So he was experimenting, and even in the 40s, before Fleck and Scruggs joined, I just found this recording of him playing on the Opry in 1942, doing Columbus Stockade Blues. It's one of the greatest things I've ever heard. And he and the guitar player Clyde Moody are singing this almost a yodeling version of it, and the band sounds like a swing band. And shortly thereafter, we had a woman named Sally Forrester join on accordion. So he was tinkering things, and he had a couple of 4-string banjo players playing with him in the 40s before Earl Scruggs. So he was tinkering with, you know, before once Fleck and Scruggs joined the band. Okay, this is it. But even after that, he was taking chances and trying different things.
Interesting. So one thing that I found interesting was I discovered a lot of those the country cooking and the breakfast special. They were all on one playlist which said 1970s bluegrass, New York bluegrass scene, and that never really went in my head that New York was its own thing in bluegrass.
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah, I mean, there was the New York thing, and then there was the Nashville thing as time went on, which was Béla Fleck and Jerry Douglas and Sam Bush, and that sort of that grouping, and Mark O'Connor. And then there was the California thing with Grisman and Darrell Anger and Mike Marshall and Tony Rice, who had joined David Grisman's quintet at that time. So, you know, we were a little more helter-skelter than those other groupings, I guess you could say.
So it was contemporaneous, or were you guys? I mean, obviously Béla was your student. So did the New York thing, was that like all over the map? People started experimenting, or was it really 1970s New York was more the beginning of really breaking the boundaries?
I can't say that necessarily. I mean, maybe we were breaking the boundaries more than other people. We were, you know, a little more harebrained or something. I don't know how to describe it exactly. Maybe we took a few more chances, but we were not quite as organized as those other folks. You know, I mean, I think their timing was maybe a little bit tighter, and but we were just sort of all over the place. You know, just sort of this crazy energy, whereas there's more of a focus, maybe you could say, with the Nashville sound and the California sound. But you know, David Grisman was writing tunes in the mid '60s and later on, and you know, so you could say that's early dog music there,
right?
And I remember I saw Sam Bush in 1965 when I was 16 at that first bluegrass festival. I remember there was this blonde-haired kid playing fiddle out in the field near the festival grounds, and it was Sam just playing a fiddle tune out there. So I've known Sam that long. And then Peter Rowan was playing with Bill Monroe in '65, and you know, he was sort of stretching the boundaries as time went on. And my real bluegrass banjo teacher, was in the band that played a block from my house in Syracuse, and they knew Peter Rowan, who was going to Colgate University near there. And so the first Syracuse Folk Festival, Doc Watson and Gene Ritchie and folks like that, and the Greenbrier Boys, I think, and Peter Rowan showed up from Colgate and backed me up in a banjo contest when I was 14. So, there's all this cross-pollination, I guess you could say. But anyway, I think it was a ferment that was sort of going on all over the place to varying degrees.
Yeah. And so how did that happen? How did Béla end up studying with you?
My first album had come out in 1973 or four, I want to say. And again, I had Andy Stanman and Kenny Kosick and Stacey Phillips, and we were, a lot of them were tunes that I had written, but there was some crazy stuff on there, to say the least. And Béla was his first teacher was a guy named Eric Darling, who was the banjo player in the Weavers after Pete Seeger left. And then he was taking lessons from a guy named Mark Horowitz, who was living, I think, in Staten Island at the time. And Mark's a wonderful banjo player, and is to this day. And but Béla wanted to learn my tunes. He had my first album somehow. I don't know how he got a hold of that. And so he'd asked Mark to teach him these tunes that I'd written, which were bizarre. And so Mark had to labor the week before the lesson, learning how to play my tune. And then finally he said, after 2 or 3 lessons, Tony lives in the Bronx. Why don't you just study with him? So the 16-year-old kid calls me up and says, "Hey, can I have banjo lessons?" And I said, "Sure." And he could already play some Scruggs style and some fiddle tunes, but he wanted me to show him some of the weird stuff that I was doing in my tunes and some of my ideas. So he would show up with a cassette machine and would record me jamming out on the traditional tune like Little Maggie for 2 or 3 minutes. And then he would come back the next week having learned every note that I played, having transcribed it and memorized it, So neither of us can remember for how long that he was taking lessons, but it wasn't that, a couple of months maybe. And then after a while, it's like, I can't really show you anything else. Let's just hang out. And yeah, he had the gift. It's pretty obvious, pretty early on.
Yeah. So just as a teacher, like if you could press a button and it would just go to download to all, music students around the world, is there some kind of something that you would want to just get across to people?
Banjo related or just anything?
Anyway, either, yeah.
Well, banjo wise, timing is everything. Just make sure your timing is together. Work with a metronome or some other timekeeping device. That's the most important thing. And then second to that is J.D. Crowe, the great banjo player, who unfortunately passed a few years ago. He said you have to have good separation of notes. And I asked him about that once. What does that mean? And he means that every note you play should be really clear, whether it's really strong traditional bluegrass or anything else. You want to have clarity in your playing, because it's amazing how many. I've got this online banjo school, and even before I had that, just teaching people, so often, usually it's people's middle finger is a little quiet for some reason, but it could be the thumb or the index finger. And there'll be just like this lack of flow in the playing if a certain finger is not strong enough. It happens all the time that people are doing this. So you want to make sure every note is clear. Not most notes, but every note. So those are the 2 main points, I would say.
Interesting. And so it's how notes end, not just how they begin.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You can see in the video or watching them in person, they're actually on that string, but I can't hear it. But then, in a more general sense, learn whatever discipline you're in, as bluegrass or jazz or whatever, transcribe the music of your heroes, learn, go back to the beginnings, like Wynton Marsalis, I think, was really good at bringing people back to Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington and Johnny Hodges and, people like that, because I think people sort of lost track of that. And the same thing with bluegrass. A lot of people these days like current bands. Yeah, I never listened to Bill Monroe. I don't listen to the Stanley Brothers. But go back to whatever discipline, learn the roots, learn the history, and then also compose their own music, improvise, step out, take chances.
Yeah. Speaking of the history, so I was pretty stunned actually watching the PBS documentary that you had helped with because of the way that the banjo kind of spread through the United States as kind of an instrument used by enslaved people on plantations, and then disseminated kind of through minstrel shows, which was the top form of entertainment in the United States and only from like 1860s to 1890s. That was really, I had no idea, but I guess that resulted in it having being kind of loaded. And people might not know why, but people have opinions about banjos or stereotypes. Is that what's going on? Is that the roots of it, or you?
Well, I think it's partly that, but then it's things like the Beverly Hillbillies and Deliverance. It's a stately instrument. I can remember walking down the street when I was living in New York City for a bunch of years. I'd walk down the street with my banjo, and people go, "Yeehaw!" like that, Or I played with one of my students in the 70s, played banjo, but he also conducted this local orchestra in South Orange, New Jersey, and invited me to play a couple of my tunes with the orchestra. And I went, okay. And the first half of the program, people are dressed in suits and ties, and for the second half, they put out a couple of bales of hay and put their necks. And I was dressed nicely and I to go out. Really? So, but yeah, I think, it's certainly the banjo has a checkered past with, as you're saying, the minstrel shows, minstrelsy and all that. I had a chance to interview Taj Mahal because he plays banjo. And he was talking about that, how, people shouldn't, or blacks shouldn't shy away from the history of this is part of the reality of what it was. And doesn't mean it's not a beautiful instrument. It's just, it has these terrible associations. But people should recognize that and understand where, this aspect of racism came from. That was his fix on it. And yeah, and one of the earliest beginnings of this was a guy named Joel Walker Sweeney, who was credited with adding the fifth string to the banjo, but if anything, it would have been the low fourth string as opposed to the short string. And he grew up in Appomattox, Virginia, in like the 1820s, 1830s, and he loved the music and the dances and the stories of the enslaved people around him. And these people were playing these gourd instruments, which could be called bonzas or merrywangs or banjars. And so he got a hold of a gourd, fashioned a neck, yanked the hair from the family's horse's tail, and twined it with beeswax and made it into strings, and killed the family cat for the head. And his mother was none too pleased, destroyed his rudimentary banjo, and so he made a second bonza and killed the second family cat. And then his mother decided, okay, let him become a banjo player. And he ended up starting one of the first minstrel shows in the 1840s. Played for Queen Victoria, the crowned heads of Europe, and et cetera, et cetera. But it was initially born out of a love for the music. But then with the whole blacking up and blackface and all this, and the imitation of enslaved people was obviously, it was acceptable at the time, but of course by today's standards, it's beyond offensive. But the music itself, there are African roots in this music, and there are banjo instruction books from the mid 1800s, and some of the music is from Ireland. There's some fiddle tunes in there, but then there's some music that's obviously of African origin. So, I started getting into that, and also they had this Tennessee Banjo Institute in the 1990. There were three of them, but the one in 1990, there were these people playing this music from these banjo instruction books from the mid 1800s, and it had this profound effect on me because I knew what was being done around 1900 with this so-called classic style parlor music on the banjo, but this was like this whole other thing, and that there are actual books that you could still find from those years. 1855 was the first year there was a banjo instruction book, and then 1858 and on from there. More of a downstroke style, which would have been more of the African way of playing, if we can quantify that. More of a rhythmic style. It was fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, I know, like, obviously Béla made that movie where he looked at the roots of the banjo, the African instruments, and I always thought like the ngoni, which, like, the instrument like Baseku Koyate is associated with him, if you know him.
Yeah.
That to me was the obvious, like, that looks a lot like a banjo to me, and the skin on the head and all that stuff. Have you incorporated any of those, transcribed or composed or used those modes or anything like that? Has that been something you've dug into at all?
A little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. I have an album called World Turning, which is the history of the banjo, basically. And I don't remember, it might have been the Ngoni or something like that from Senegal or Mali.
Yeah.
And I transcribed the playing, and I don't remember the name of the musician who recorded it now, unfortunately. But the first tune on there is about the death of a king from this African city.
Oh yes, I heard the album, and yeah, it's a traditional like griot tune. Yeah, it's
right.
like a la Lacte or one of those. Yeah.
And then I transcribed onto the banjo, onto a nylon strung banjo, what that player had done. So, and that's about it. I didn't get deeply into it. I did it for that one tune.
Cool. And then the big rage now are the Earl Jam albums are hot, man. Everybody.
It's on everybody's tongue around the world, even in the White House. No. Anyway, not quite.
Not yet. But so that was a cool thing. So you discovered these tunes, these Earl Scruggs recordings.
There's a guy up in Syracuse, New York, coincidentally, named Bob Pekel, and we were working on correcting some changes in the second Earl Scruggs book, which came out, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, whenever it was now. And while we were working on that, this guy Bob Pekel would send me one or two songs from these jam sessions with Earl Scruggs and John Hartford that took place from the mid 80s through the mid 90s. Because Earl was starting to get he didn't want to tour anymore. He'd had a family tragedy, and I was just like, he was thinking of just laying down the banjo, and John Hartford was not going to let Earl Scruggs do that. So he'd say, okay, you don't have to go on tour, but let's just jam. And for those 10 years, approximately, sometimes it'd just be the two of them jamming. Sometimes you can hear Tony Rice in there, Mac Wiseman, Del McCurry. Sometimes just the two of them with a bass player. And John was always playing fiddle, and Earl was always playing banjo, needless to say. And so I said, where'd you get these? And it turned out that Bob had been at some of these jam sessions and at John Hartford's house, some at Earl's house. And that John Hartford at some point had said to Bob Pekel, if my house burns down, all these recordings will be lost. So I'm going to send copies of all these recordings to you, which he did. And then Bob digitized them. And so after sending one or two of these tunes here and there, Bob sent a thumb drive of over 200 of these tunes. And I started listening to them and hearing tunes that we never heard Earl do, like Chinese Breakdown, one thing and another. Here Comes the Bride, they did that. Like, what? And plus, some tunes we knew him to play, like Cripple Creek, but doing like blues licks on it. You're not supposed to do that. And it was, instead of Earl, being in the recording studio, you get one solo on this tune. You could take 3 solos in a row. Anyway, so it's just this treasure trove of things. And I started transcribing a bunch of these things, slowing them down to half speed and figuring out what Earl was doing. And I kind of thought that at some point, these recordings may never see the light of day, but whatnot, I do some recordings of some of these things, and where every note that I play will be note for note what Earl played, as opposed to my own stuff. And that's what I did. That's how Earl Jam 1 came into being, and then Earl Jam 2.
Yeah, and you got such great, new generation, unbelievable artists like Molly Tuttle and Billy Strings. So that must have been. I mean, I don't know if you'd played with them before the Earl Jams, or if that was your first encounters with those artists.
Billy, I'd sat in on a couple of his. He'd invited me to sit in on a couple of his gigs,
Mhm.
or he got gigantic, but he was still filling 600-seat theaters at that point. So, so I got to sit in with him, and then Béla had this My Bluegrass Heart album, and Béla wanted to have a triple banjo thing with himself, Noam McCartney, and myself. And he filled out the band with David Grisman and Billy Strings. So Billy and I were on that same tune. And it was just, his soloing was, every solo was different and perfect and amazing and taking chances. And I was like, oh my God, how great is that? I mean, I knew he was great anyway. But anyway, so I invited him to play 2 songs. The first, which was Browns Ferry Blues, which is on the first Earl Jam album. Then Gentle on My Mind, the John Hartford iconic tune, which is on Earl Jam 2.
Mhm.
And Molly Tuttle, I've known since she was 15. I was doing this workshop in Mount Shasta, Northern California, and it was almost all young people. And I thought I would be teaching banjo players, but there was one banjo player, and it was this young lady who was probably 15 at the time. And there were 3 banjo teachers. Don't ask me; I don't understand it myself. So the 3 of us banjo teacher giving a lesson to this one woman, young lady. She was like 15 or 16 maybe, and she was playing good Scruggs style banjo. And it was Molly Tuttle. She became Molly Tuttle.
Wow.
And then I got to know her at the Berklee College of Music because I teach up there. And I do a Christmas show every year, so I invited her to be my guitar player and singer in my Christmas show. And we did a recording at Lee Von Helm's barn that she's on. So I go way back with her. But on Earl Jam 2, Sister Sadie, I'd never hung with them before, so that was the first time. And the Steel Driver is the same thing. So,
Wow. So I couldn't let you go before. I don't know too many people who have been as close to Paul McCartney as you, or anybody who has any interactions. I can't let an interview end without asking about that.
my good buddy Paul. I've gotten friendly with Steve Martin in more recent years, and I did a lot of pre-production work on his first banjo album of the new era, which was now 15 years ago or whatever, 12 years ago, called The Crow. But for his second album, he asked me to produce it, which is Rare Bird Alert. And he'd written this silly love song, as he referred to it. And so he wanted to get Tom Waits to sing it potentially, maybe someone else. And I mentioned it to my son Sean. And Sean said, "Silly love songs. Why don't you get Paul McCartney?" Because Paul McCartney had a song called "Silly Love Songs." And so I said, "Yeah, right. That'll ever happen." Well, it is Steve Martin. So without going into the details, it worked out that we got Paul McCartney to sing an overdub on the song, and I was the producer. And it turned out that Paul was divorced from his wife, but they had joint custody of their daughter or something like this. I can't remember the details. And Paul was with his daughter on Long Island because he has a place. He could have a place wherever he wants it, I imagine. And so he was going to be on Long Island on this day. So we flew up from Asheville in Steve's jet, which is always a nice way to travel, and landed at some local airport. And our engineer, who was from Nashville, couldn't find a studio out where Paul was going to be, but found this woman's house that she would get Broadway singers in there. And there was a closet. That was it. She had a little recording equipment augmented by our engineer. And so we're hanging out in this woman's house, and Paul calls to say he's going to be a little bit late. And then he shows up in flip-flops and shorts and a short sleeve shirt. and immediately puts us at our ease, just joking around and being just a regular guy. And so it was time to record, and I said, would you like some water? And I'm producing Paul McCartney's vocal, which is like the most bizarre thing in the world because I'm producing this album. And so, I'll have some water. So he's in there for about 40 minutes, something like that, just doing, still kind of learning the song, but then really had it down and just trying different things and improvising. And he comes out, and I said, would you like to rehydrate? And then he pretends to hold a microphone and said, if I was Elvis Presley and I'm singing, you ain't nothing but a hound dog, and rocking all the time. Oh, excuse me, can I have a glass of water? And I'm standing like 3 feet, he's right in front of me talking to me. Or if I was the Beatles and I'm singing, she loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. Excuse me, can I have a glass of water? And so, on one level, it's, I've been around other celebrities like Steve, but still, it's Paul McCartney. And a part of me is going, oh my God, I cannot believe I'm standing this close to Paul McCartney. He's singing this at me. Anyway, and that was it. And then he went back and did another 20 minutes or so, and just improvising, doing some great stuff.
Wow. I think you got a book in you if you haven't written one yet.
People have said that. I don't know who would be interested, but there's some fun stories, that being primo amongst them, obviously.
Well, yeah, no, I feel like we only scratched the surface, but yeah. So the last question, and this is maybe the most fundamental, but there's this joke, maybe you've heard it. It's this guy who is at the circus, and his job is to follow the elephant with a shovel.
Yeah.
And someone says, hey buddy, like, why are you doing that job? You could do anything. And he says, and leave show business?
Well said.
So
yeah.
So
good delivery.
Thank you. Well rehearsed, I suppose. That's one of my favorites. And I think of it all the damn time, because it comes up. But so when my wife and I met you the other night, she was like, oh my God, like, what a magical person. He's so lovely. And in the car back, we're like, yeah, and he's been in the music business all these years.
He's not cynical yet.
Yeah, what's going on, man? How do you maintain this? You seem to be, from what I've seen, very generous, kind person. You seem to not have gotten cynical. You seem to maintain most of your relationships musically.
Well, I'd rather not get into that, if you don't mind.
Hey, if you hit 33, you'd be in the Hall of Fame. So yeah, no, but
I consider myself extremely lucky. I'm a banjo player. I don't sing, and I've made a career out of this. Sonny Rollins just died, and I read the obit. The day I turned 50, I started reading the obits in the paper. And of course, that year, that particular day, it was 48, 52. No, this isn't good. And then the next day, 90, 87. Okay, this is all right.
You're talking to a 49-year-old, but okay. Yeah.
Well, wait till you hit 50. It all goes downhill. Jeez. Anyway, I was reading the Sonny Rollins obit a few days ago. And he that's what he said. I consider myself to be so lucky. I've been able to play music for my whole life. And I feel the same way, In college, speaking of your elephant joke, I worked at a children's zoo and cleaned up all sorts of poop for the summer. But anyway, since I got out of school, I've earned my living just as playing music. I never had to get a regular job, and I consider myself to be blessed and I think I'll make it all the way to the end. And something always comes along to keep it interesting. Like learning about what the banjo sounded like in the 1850s, or getting to hang out with Paul McCartney for a few hours. And I was just recently commissioned to write a 5-minute chamber piece, which I've finished, and I'm doing the tidying up on that now. So it's one thing after another, and then the Earl Jam stuff that falls into my lap. So there's always something interesting that keeps it moving along. And it's the bluegrass business, the banjo business is not a cutthroat business. I'm going to step on top of this person so I can get even more money. We're not getting rich in this business, but it's just a bunch of good folks, really good folks.
I guess you've stayed dedicated to music itself too. I mean, from what I'm hearing, you're still exploring. It's some people, are careerists and they get their music to a certain point, but the career is the focus. But it seems like you're still always trying new things, just purely musically, or like getting into new stuff or push.
Yeah. I mean, and again, people would say, you need a 5-year plan. What are you going to do? Where do you want to be 5 years from now? Yeah, I'd like my jet. I'd like a bus. I'd like to be earning $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, whatever, but there are limits to what a banjo player can earn, or how far can you go? But things have just fallen in place somehow, all the way along the line. I early on, there was a family trust fund. This was like in the early 70s, and I was really struggling to get by, and it was not a big trust fund by any means. Maybe in this, I was about to I got to think about getting a real job, and then this trust fund was broken up, and I was given $2,000 or something, which in those days was nice, but it's not going to change my life. But it kind of lifted me up, and I always use this cinematic metaphor or cartoonish metaphor of Mickey Mouse and Goofy are on the top of 100. There's some cartoons, I've seen this cartoon, like 100 stories up, building a skyscraper, and they're on these girders, and Goofy is sleepwalking like this, and he's walking to the end of the girder, and he's about to plummet 100 stories down. And as that happens, a girder comes along parallel to him, and he gets on that and starts sleepwalking on that. And I look at my career as being that when things start looking grim, something comes along and just saves the day. So
yeah, that's the polar opposite of a 5-year plan, I would say.
Exactly. That girder may or may not show up. So I guess I lucked out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat. This was super fun. I learned
really
a lot.
Fun. All right. Well, thank you so much, David. I so appreciate it.
Great. Likewise. Have a great rest of the day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Ciao.